All right. Thank you guys for taking the time to talk to us. Understanding that we got a little bit of a crisis on our hands, but we wanted to lay out what our crisis management plan is, seeing as the team has recently completed that. We wanted to present it to you and how we plan to address it moving forward. So, just really briefly laying out kind of where we're at right now. As we all know, Scottie Pippen, after recently being hired as the head coach, decided to step down from the organization and not really focusing on that, but focusing on what our current crisis is that we need to find a new head coach. We need to introduce a new head coach because luckily the organization hires Michael Jordan to take his place. So we're going to outline here how we plan to deal with that, but to give you an idea kind of where we got to where we are, some of these short-term implications and long-term implications are what we identified and kind of help to morph how we see our presentation or how we see our crisis management plan moving. So not to run through them all, but to focus on one of the short-term implications, the negative publicity from the media. Obviously, negative publicity is never good, and we could see it being an issue with this crisis, but we feel like our plan is laid out in a way that is going to be very straightforward and very direct to all our stakeholders, and is going to kind of limit any sort of negative publicity that could come from the current crisis that we're facing. And then from a long-term perspective, the negative publicity can turn into a long-term drop in organizational value and reputation. So not only from a team brand perspective, but obviously any sort of revenue could potentially drop if any of our sponsors decide they don't want it to renew with the team because they don't want to be associated with anything negative that's currently happening. But again, we feel like our plan does a good job of laying out how to avoid any of that. So what we'll do is we'll introduce you guys to the crisis management team, talk about the goal, the key messages, the guiding principles that we see moving us through this crisis. We identified a few stakeholders and different ways of communicating with them, as well as some frequently asked questions that may pop up during some of this communication, and then we're going to talk about the evaluation. But really quick, to introduce the crisis management team, while Michael Reinsdorf is kind of going to be overseeing our team, really the legwork is going to be done by everyone that's going to be presenting here. And you can see down on the bottom left, we've kind of hit all the main roles that come with the crisis management team. And then on the right, we kind of lay out who's going to be taking care of what directly. Within that, each of us is kind of presenting based off of, but we also have backups set forth just in case that main point of contact is not available. So I will pass it off to Danae, who's going to talk a little bit about our goal and how we're going to formulate the rest of the plan.
Great, thanks, Matt. The overall goal of the Chicago Bulls Crisis Management Plan is to restore trust among key stakeholders and empower confidence in the organization's new hire. We will do this through selective messaging strategies that help to achieve this goal. It is important that we show our stakeholders that while Pippen was originally selected for the head coaching position, the hire of Michael Jordan was not seen as the organization's second option by any means. By involving some of our top leaders in announcing the hire and through specific word choice, we feel this message will get across to our stakeholders successfully. We've chosen a variety of strategies to align our objectives in an effort to reach stakeholders appropriately. Each group requires a slightly different form of communication and amount of information, so while the messages will stay the same, the avenue we'll take to deliver the message will vary slightly. As you can see, we have outlined the objectives, strategies, and tactics, steps taken to achieve the appropriate amount of communication to different stakeholders. Direct internal stakeholders, such as employees, will be communicated via email in great detail, and coaches and players will be communicated to directly in person. A broader overview is shared with the internal stakeholders by sending emails to sponsors and season ticket holders. And lastly, our last strategy is to announce the new hire to external stakeholders, which will be executed on social media and on the team website, as well as send out a press release to media members and hold a press conference. In each of these forms of communication strategies, the following key messages are meant to be the main talking points when speaking to anyone outside of the organization. Ultimately, any comment should attempt to communicate one of the following messages. First, to announce Michael Jordan as the head coach for the Chicago Bulls. Second, to elaborate, Jordan was one of the favorites of the team when the initial search was conducted because of his experience as a player and leadership ability. Third, the Chicago Bulls executive team is extremely excited for the organization, the city of Chicago, and the Chicago Bulls fans about the hiring. And lastly, during the coaching search, although there was no timetable set, hiring the right person as soon as possible was the top priority for the organization. Next, as a part of the crisis management plan, it is important to ensure we keep the right messages as an organization, keep consistently the right messages as an organization during this crisis. This can be done by laying out a handful of guiding principles which should be remembered throughout the crisis. These include focusing the subject of any communication upon the hiring of Michael Jordan as the head coach as the first and foremost point. Every employee should have a thorough understanding of the key messages and how they should be communicated prior to speaking to stakeholders. Employees should refrain from discussing the hiring process or decisions outside of the organization unless told otherwise. Commit to only distributing the communication materials in the crisis management plan, and avoid initiating discussion on the resignation of Scottie Pippen. In general, our policy is to focus on the bright future for the organization with Michael Jordan leading the team, and to avoid initiation of conversation regarding Pippen's resignation. And so now we'll turn it over to Sam, who will talk about the stakeholders and further communication strategies.
Awesome. Thanks, Danae. As you can see, we have laid out our stakeholders internally and externally. We have 6 stakeholders that we really want to focus on throughout this crisis communication plan for 3 main reasons. One, we want to show how much we value each of these stakeholders. 2, as Danae pointed out, we want to restore trust in our organization. And lastly, we just want to build confidence moving forward throughout this crisis. As you can see, we separated the coaching staff and players from the front office employees. We've done this because the coaching staff and players are going to be the most directly impacted due to this crisis. And we want to be able to have a coaching and players meeting and have a conversation regarding it to create such an open floor for that stakeholder. When it comes to the front office employees, we will be sending out an email following that meeting with the coaching staff and players. And then, as you can see, we have sort of combined the season ticket holders and sponsors together within a stakeholder group. And we've done this because along with our front office employees, we're going to send them an email in which will be very similar with each other between the season ticket holders and sponsors. From there, we're going to communicate with our fans through our social media presence and through our the Chicago Bulls organization's website. And then from there, we will communicate with the media from press conferences to press releases. One, to create that positive atmosphere between the Bulls organization and the media, and to communicate to people who might not necessarily be fans of the Bulls, but are within this stakeholder group. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Matt.
Thanks, Sam. So how are we going to communicate with each of these stakeholder groups? What we did was we developed 9 different pieces of communication, which are all present in the deck, the paper that we just passed along to you. So each of those examples have been approved by the organization and are ready to be sent out whenever we are ready to put this crisis management plan into activation. So as you mentioned, there's going to be a variety of communication material between emails, press releases. We got a couple different examples of social media that are going to help to hit the fans, and then public speaking. So we got a couple different talking points, whether it's speaking to the players and coaching staff or speaking to the media. It's a focused tiered communication approach. So depending on how far up inside the internal or how far up inside the stakeholder chain you are, and um, how much information we feel like needs to be passed along to you, that's how much you're going to get, and you kind of see that laid out in the different pieces of communication. So, for example, our coaches and players and internal staff members are all going to receive a little bit more detail in terms of how we went about the hiring process, not only for Michael Jordan, but also for Scottie Pippen, just to give them an idea of we went through the same process that we went through everybody else. So, all this information just it didn't show up. It's not like we skipped any steps here. But then as we go down the chain, we felt like our season ticket holders and our sponsors don't necessarily need to know that information. They do need to know though that we went about the hiring process, and they're going to get a couple different pieces of information from a few of our key Bulls executives, and then our fans and our media are both just going to receive the same info on the hiring of Michael Jordan. We're just going to focus on that with them because we feel like that's the most impacted group in terms of perception. So if we can keep their perception of the organization positive, that is going to help uh, alleviate this crisis management or this crisis in a short amount of time. So we are going to focus on Michael Jordan, like I mentioned, and the excitement is a big thing. So Danae talked about, the key wording. We're going to really focus on how excited we are as an organization. We're going to have a bunch of our Bulls executives, so whether it's John Paxson or Michael Reinsdorf, talking about what we're doing and why we chose Michael Jordan and how excited they are not only for the organization but for Chicago Bulls fans. So we're hoping that resonates with people. And then we also have a couple pieces of communication material that aren't necessary but are available in the event we feel like something needs to be released regarding Scottie Pippen. But again, those aren't necessary. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give it to Mark, who's going to talk about some of the frequently asked questions that may come up during a press conference or whatever that we need to be prepared for.
Yep, thanks. So we prepared a document with some potential questions that we think will be frequently asked of us. And throughout these answers, we're going to try to be as clear and truthful as we can be, while also providing the necessary relevant information that's being asked of us. So we'll be reinforcing our key messages throughout the Q&A. And specifically, we're going to try to keep the point of focus on the hiring of Michael Jordan and our excitement of his hire. We'll be prepared to explain the full process in which we came about his hiring. And we will also be prepared to answer questions about our recent head coaching resignation, but we'll try to direct most of those questions to the former head coach and his team of people. Finally, we'll be sure to focus the conversation on our general excitement for the upcoming 2018-2019 season. And while we can't be 100% prepared for every single question that might be asked of us, we can be fully prepared to answer everything 100% truthfully, which is what we plan to do. I'll now pass it off to Jen to discuss our evaluation plan.
Thank you. When looking at our evaluation plan, we're going to focus on monitoring emotion from our stakeholders. We'll do this by observing conversations when it comes to renewal time, specifically with sponsors and our season ticket holders, as well as looking at social media conversations as well. We'll look at business continuity here, our sponsors continuing to renew, our season ticket holders continuing to renew at the same percentage as before, or even higher. And if they aren't renewing, our new sales coming in, replacing those old sponsorships or old season ticket holder sales. We'll also be looking at the NBA stakeholder surveys to get feedback on what they're thinking as well. We'll also be looking at Media Day and opening night interest. Is the media showcasing Media Day a lot, or opening night as well, as that is probably one of our biggest games of the year, opening night, and has very high attendance as well. We'll also be looking at the questions that the media is asking. We'll have our public relations team look into this and see what our common questions are as well. And we'll just continue to look over what the media is saying and how our stakeholders are reacting, and focusing on the positives internally as well and communicating that to them. So this concludes our crisis management plan. Are there any questions? Right. We feel that we're ready to implement this plan right away, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.